And the Prime Minister has arrived at the venue of the G7 summit, and he is meeting with the Italian Prime Minister Meloni there. So there you can see the Italian Prime Minister greeting Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Prime Minister is a special invitee for the G7, and he's held a series of bilateral meetings already on the sidelines of the summit of world leaders. He met with the UK counterpart Rishi Sunak, French President Emmanuel Macron, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky just a short while ago. These meetings have taken place, and there the Prime Minister greeted by the Italian Prime Minister Meloni, and later today he is invited for an informal dinner as well by the Italian Prime Minister. He will leave Italy at around 11 p.m. or after. So the Prime Minister there in Italy for the G7 as a special invitee. So several bilaterals have been held already. It's not clear whether the Prime Minister will indeed hold a special bilateral, a separate talks, or just a pull aside with US President Biden. The Prime Minister earlier, before arriving in Italy, had said, "I look forward to meeting fellow world leaders and discussing a wide range of issues aimed at making our planet better and improving lives of people." In fact, the initial focus of the G7 has been on Ukraine, and the G7 leaders on day one, which was yesterday, agreed to a $50 billion loan for Ukraine using profits from frozen Russian assets. So that was the big focus at the G7 on day one. And Prime Minister Modi there in Italy for the G7, arriving there at the venue where the G7 summit is taking place. As we said, the Prime Minister India has been invited as an outreach country, and this is the Prime Minister's first overseas trip, in fact, since taking oath as Prime Minister for a third straight term. Let's go across to NDTV's Vishnu Shrom, who's there in Italy. And Vishnu, so we have, those visuals of the Italian Prime Minister greeting Narendra Modi as he arrived at the venue of the summit. Tell us what more is going to happen today. Already some key bilaterals have taken place.
So it's been a very interesting visit. It's just a short visit as far as India's Prime Minister is concerned, 24 hours, but within this, it's fairly action-packed. The Prime Minister has met the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Just moments back, he met Giorgia Meloni, who greeted him at the G7 venue. India and Italy have a bilateral meeting G7 here in Italy. And there'll be an informal dinner being hosted by the Italian Prime Minister when Prime Minister Narendra Modi will attend before he departs for India later tonight. The Prime Minister has also met some of India's closest strategic partners, whether it's the British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak or the French Prime Minister Emmanuel Macron. He will also have a bilateral meeting with Mr. Kishida, the Prime Minister of Japan. Very, very significant indeed. Not yet had a meeting with the US President Joe Biden, and so far, contrary to expectations that perhaps something would happen in terms of a meeting with Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister, that's not taken place so far. Unclear if that will happen. India and Canada, of course, have a pretty poor relationship at this stage because of Indian concerns on Khalistani separatism emanating from Canadian soil. So, Ukraine is important. It is the key issue, the key agenda as far as G7 this time is concerned. And the fact that you've had Prime Minister Modi meet President Zelensky certainly sends a clear message that on the one hand, we are very close partners with Moscow, with Russia. There's an economic relationship. We're importing their oil. There's a strategic relationship. We still, at the same time, remain very close to Ukraine for all sorts of reasons. Gargi.
All right, and tell us about, the program as the Prime Minister arrives at the venue, the formal program today. We also know he'll be hosted for an informal dinner by the Italian Prime Minister later, just before he then leaves from Italy.
Well, I can tell you what's going to happen next because I've got a feed coming out. Next, there are going to be addresses by the President of the Council of Ministers, Giorgia Meloni, and the Holy Father Pope Francis at the G7 summit. So there you have it. That's a live update on what is expected over here. The Prime Minister, when he's over here at the G7 summit, will also be attending specific sessions which look at artificial intelligence, which look at migration, which look at Africa, which look at clean energy transition and the Pacific region as well. In terms of anything else on Ukraine and the Prime Minister, that seems unlikely at this stage. I would also add that since the meeting with President Zelensky has taken place now, it does seem increasingly unlikely that Prime Minister Modi will be traveling to Switzerland for the peace summit, which is scheduled to happen tomorrow. That is a peace summit, a Swiss-pushed summit in Lucerne, to try and get a peace settlement happening with the Russians, but the Russian government isn't attending that at all. So it's a Swiss-pushed effort, but no luck in attracting the Russians.